Hey everybody, welcome to Mad Backyard. Today we're going to show you how to make pulled pork in an electric smoker. I'm going to show you how to pick out the best pork shoulder, prep it, season it, and smoke it step by step so that you get the most delicious, fall apart, tender pulled pork you've ever had. When you're at the store picking out a pork shoulder, make sure to get a bone-in pork shoulder, sometimes called a pork butt or a pork butt roast. Stay away from the boneless ones. You also want to make sure you pick out one with a good amount of fat and marbling. This is what's going to help keep the pork butt nice and juicy while it's smoking for many, many hours. Lastly, I wouldn't pick up the biggest pork shoulder in the case. I find the ones in the 7 to 9 pound range tend to work the best. When you get to 10, 11, or over 12 pounds on a pork butt, sometimes they have a tendency to dry out a little bit before they finish cooking. On a smaller pork shoulder, you'll also get more seasoning relative to the amount of meat, so that's more crusty bark at the end of the day mixed up inside your pulled pork. You can trim and season the pork shoulder the night before or the day before like we're going to help save yourself some time on the day of the cook. When you take the pork shoulder out of the packaging and put it down on the counter, fat side up, you'll notice that it tapers down towards one end. This end is what's known as the money muscle by competition cooks, and it's the most tender part of the pork shoulder. The other fatter side is where you'll generally be able to feel, if not see, the bone inside. I find pork to be extremely forgiving whether you trim the fat or not, so it's really up to you how much of the fat cap you want to trim off. Sometimes I don't trim any of the fat cap. However, if it's very uneven, where one part is maybe very thin and the other part's a quarter to even a half an inch thick, I'll sometimes trim some off just to try to even it out a little bit. Make sure to have a good sharp boning knife like this one, and just gently peel away some of the fat from the fat cap until it's a nice even layer about a 1/4 inch in thickness. Now it's time to season the pork shoulder. Today I'm using one of my favorite rubs for pork. It's the Gospel from Meat Church. If you watch our channel, you know I love using many of their rubs for the great color and flavor you get. And if you haven't tried the Gospel, I would definitely recommend checking it out. Don't be stingy with the rub. There's a lot of meat here that we need to season, so put on a good thick amount on all sides. I don't typically use binders anymore as I don't find them necessary. Just sprinkle the rub on all sides and then let the pork butt sit for about 20 to 30 minutes. This will give the rub time to soak in and pull some moisture out, creating a nice paste on the outside. This will hopefully give us better bark later when we put it in the smoker. Next, let's talk about cooking time. Now, I want this pork butt to be finished in the late afternoon, so I'm going to be putting it in very early in the morning, more like middle of the night. A good rule of thumb when smoking a pork butt is to allow 60 to 90 minutes of cooking time per pound of meat. Since we've got an 8-pound pork butt today, that's going to be anywhere from 8 to 12 hours of cooking time. And I know from experience that electric smokers generally take on the longer end of that range. So I'm planning for about 12 hours of cooking time on this 8-pound pork shoulder. Now, the nice thing about a smoked pork shoulder is that you can hold it for a long time after it's finished, and it's still going to be delicious once you finally serve it. In fact, the longer you let it rest, sometimes the better results you end up seeing. So in my opinion, it's always better to finish the pork early than to try to time it exactly to when you're going to be eating. Otherwise, it might stall out, your guests are standing around hungry, and you end up rushing it and it won't come out as good. Even if you finish really early, you can always hold it in your oven on the warm setting or put it back in the electric smoker set to about 170 degrees. It'll stay nice and hot until it's time to serve. Now that it's trimmed and seasoned, we're going to wrap it in plastic wrap, throw it in the refrigerator, and I'm going to plan on getting it on the smoker around 2 a.m. Today we're going to be using a Masterbuilt Electric Smoker. If you're brand new to using a Masterbuilt Electric Smoker, make sure to check out the video we made on how to start and burn in a new one before you start cooking food on it. I'll put a link to it down in the description as well as in the corner right here. And one of my favorite accessories for Masterbuilt electric smokers is the slow smoker attachment that goes right on the side. The slow smoker attachment lets you load an entire chute full of wood chips so they burn and smoke for multiple hours, rather than having to load the wood chips individually, one handful at a time, every 30 minutes. And because the slow smoker attachment has its own power supply and heating element, you can generate smoke without necessarily turning on your smoker. We made a video showing you how to cold smoke cheese in your smoker doing exactly this. So to set up the smoker, we're going to turn it on and initially set the temperature to 250 degrees. I like to start the temperature off a little lower when I first put the meat in, especially if I'm taking it right out of the refrigerator and it's very cold. This just gives the meat a more gentle start in my opinion, and I'm less likely to dry out the corners and the edges if I start on a little bit lower temperature. And then as some of the fat starts to render and we get a little more protection around the meat, as I like to think of it, then I feel more comfortable turning the temperature all the way up to 275 degrees. You can smoke the whole time at 250. However, I found that I get just as good results smoking at 275, and you save yourself a lot of time. I know some recipes even recommend smoking as low as 225 degrees, but just know that especially in an electric smoker, if you smoke at that low of a temperature, it's going to take about 24 hours to finish your pork. It'll come out fine, but it's going to take forever, and I just found it's not necessary. I also like to smoke with a water pan. I don't generally use the pan that comes with the electric smoker, as it's just one more thing I have to clean. So instead, I use a disposable foil pan like this. I'm also going to fill it with a little bit of apple juice mixed with the water. I don't know if this adds any additional flavor, but it does smell nice as the pork is cooking. Make sure to add the water pan as the smoker's preheating, because if you preheat your smoker up to 250 and then add the water pan in, it's going to drop down in temperature and you'll have to wait even longer for it to come back up. If you have the slow smoker attachment, you can turn it on at this time as well, but don't add the wood chips yet. You want to let the heating element get nice and hot before you add the wood chips. The same is true if you're just using the standard loading tray that comes on your Masterbuilt electric smoker. Let it preheat completely before you start adding wood chips. If you add them before the heating elements come up to temperature, you're just going to create a lot of white, dirty startup smoke that you don't want to use anyway, and just end up wasting a lot of wood chips. You always want to add your wood chips to a hot preheated smoker or slow smoker attachment. Also, make sure to open the vent completely so that you get maximum airflow and oxygen going to the wood chips so you get the best possible burn as they're smoking. Today I'm going to be using a combination of cherry and hickory wood on our pulled pork. Some other great options to try would be apple, oak, or pecan wood. Once the smoker's up to temperature and the wood chips are making some good smoke, go ahead and put the pork butt in on the rack right above the water pan. I like to cook mine with the fat side up. That way the more vulnerable meat side is facing down towards the water pan and it's a little better protected from drying out. Then close the door and let it start cooking. If you're new to using electric smokers, just know that the smoke flavor you get from them can be a little more concentrated than what you might be used to from using, say, a pellet grill or even a charcoal or offset smoker. Whereas those types of smokers have lots of airflow rushing through them throughout most of the cook, the air inside of an electric smoker tends to stay a little more still. Therefore, the smoke tends to hang out and infuse in the meat a little longer as a result. I found that about 3 to 4 hours of smoke in an electric smoker is more than enough time to get good smoke flavor on my pulled pork without overdoing it. If you want to go for more, by all means, go ahead, but if you're still new to electric smokers and haven't gotten used to how much smoke flavor you get based on how much time you add wood chips, just be a little conservative until you get used to your smoker. You don't want to put all this time and energy into smoking your pork butt, only for it to come out tasting way too smoky. If you don't have the slow smoker attachment, you'll need to reload wood chips in the wood chip loading tray about every 30 minutes as the wood chips smoke and smolder out. I also like to empty the ashtray inside the smoker every 2 to 3 hours so it doesn't overfill with burnt up wood chips. If you're using the slow smoker attachment, you won't have to worry about any of that. Just load it up with wood chips and let it run for about 3 hours. During this time, you just want to let the pork cook and do its thing. Try to resist the temptation to open the door unless you really have to. Electric smokers lose a lot of heat every time you open the door, and they do take a while to come back up in temperature. So unless you really need to open that door for a good reason, keep it shut. I only open the door to spray or rotate the pork butt maybe once or twice during the entire cook. On this one, after about 4 hours, I opened the door and sprayed it with a combination of apple juice and apple cider vinegar. There's no need to spray the fat cap on top. We're not worried about the fat drying out. Actually, we want to keep the fat cap nice and hot so that that fat keeps rendering and melting away. So only worry about spraying the meat itself on the sides, along the edges and corners, that money muscle area where it tapers down especially. This is also a good time to rotate the pork and put a temperature probe in as well. That way you're doing everything all at once and not needing to open the door more times than you have to. I like to use the Meter wireless temperature probe. It's an easy way to track the internal temperature of my meat from my phone, so I don't have to run any wires through the doors or the vents or anything like that. It's all completely wireless and easy to use, and I can track the temperature no matter where I am in the house. And again, it lets me track everything without having to open the door to the smoker. I'll put a link to it down in the description below if you want to take a look at it. All right, the pork butt's been in the smoker for about 8 hours now. It was a little cold last night, so it's taken a little longer to get to the point I want it to than it does sometimes in the summer, or if it's a hotter day and you got the sun beating on the smoker. So just take that in consideration. Your time's not always going to be the same as mine for the first stage. But on the meter, we can take a look at the temperature here. We're up to 160 degrees internally. I want it to be up to at least 150. That's really when we hit the stall. Kind of that 130 to 160 range is really when fat's rendering. And then once we get up to 160 to 180, that's really when the collagen starts rendering. And that's that kind of fibrous stuff inside the pork butt that I always think of it like rubber bands, okay? If you think of the pork butt being full of rubber bands inside, those are the things we want to break down so that it becomes fall apart tender. So we haven't reached that stage yet, but we are at the stage where our bark is looking nice. I peeked at this a minute ago. And what I'm looking for is not necessarily that internal temperature, like I said, but I want a really nice bark that's not going to be coming off in the foil when we wrap it, okay? This is solid on there at this point. And then the fat up at the top, I don't want it to be rubbery. I want it to kind of give a little more when I press on it. If you remember in our brisket video, it's the same idea. I push on the fat and my thumb kind of goes into it like that, okay? So that's what I'm looking for. That means the fat's really rendering and it's going to be nicely set up once we wrap it. So just keeping track of where everything is still. We still have our money muscle over here. Our bone is still over here. Nothing's moved, but just get a sense for where everything is on the pork butt. So nice color, nice bark. We're going to go ahead and take the meter out now. We'll put that back in a minute. And then I like to set up a piece of cardboard down here so I'm not dripping pork grease all over my deck or patio or wherever I'm cooking. And then I'm going to take a foil pan, and then make sure you have your vinyl gloves, your nitrile gloves over your cloth liners, okay? This is the easiest way to handle hot food when you're barbecuing. It's the easiest way, rather than having to mess with tongs and things like that, to handle a big piece of meat like this. We're gonna put it down in the foil pan. We're gonna get rid of this water pan. This is gonna be wrapped, so there's no point in having the water pan anymore, so I'll get rid of that in a minute. And then up on the top here, we're also gonna close the vent down because we don't need airflow anymore either. We wanna maximize holding that heat inside. We've already formed our bark. We're done smoking a long time ago with wood chips, so basically just running it like an oven at this point. So I'm gonna close this to keep our heat in. And if it starts raining or the weather's bad or you just don't want to be outside anymore, there's nothing wrong with finishing it in your oven at this point. We're going to wrap it in foil. So all we're doing at this point is applying heat. So I don't look at it as cheating. If you finish it in the oven, just set it to the same temperature, 270, 275 in your oven. You can finish it in there comfortably. You're going to get the exact same results. We've already formed our bark. We've already added smoke. The smoking process itself is pretty much done. We just got to finish cooking this thing. All right, so we've got the pork butt in the foil pan. I'm gonna add a little bit of this honey hog barbecue from Meat Church. This is another seasoning I really like. And we're just gonna sprinkle a little bit of this over the top to add a little more. Don't want that side, I don't want the sprinkle side. Just gonna add a little more sugar to the top here. Not gonna go crazy with it. We already added a lot of seasoning. And then we're gonna salt it to taste later after we pull it and add a little more vinegar for acidity, but just want to kind of get this going. You'll see some people add brown sugar and butter and all these other things when they wrap it in foil, kind of like you would with ribs. I don't generally do that with pork butt. I think there's enough fat in here and juices that you're going to see come out, but I just like to add that little extra bit of sugar stickiness there. I used to wrap the whole pork butt in foil top to bottom, but what I found is it was kind of a pain to do, and I usually ended up getting a hole in it and leaking out juices, and it just kind of became a mess. So I've switched to doing it in a foil pan like this, and I'm just going to cover the top in aluminum foil. You can do it however you want, but I just find this to be a lot easier for moving it around. And I tend to get the same results either way I do it. Crimp it along the edges real good so you don't have a lot of air getting in. And then I may wrap this with one more layer going the other way. And then we're gonna put it right back in the smoker. Try not to spend too much time out here so it doesn't get too cold on us. And then lastly, I almost forgot, want to put our meter back in. So we're just gonna go right through the top of the foil here, kind of as best we can into the middle of the pork butt there. Okay, and then we're gonna get this right back in the smoker. I'm gonna push that down a little more. There we go. And then I'm gonna pull that water pan out of there and we'll keep cooking. We're just gonna keep the smoker running at 275 degrees until the meat reaches an internal temperature of 203 degrees Fahrenheit. Mine ended up taking another 3 hours wrapped before it reached this temperature. So it was 8 hours before we wrapped, 3 hours once we wrapped, so 11 hours total on this 8-pound pork butt. So the pork butt's been resting for about 2 hours since we pulled it from the smoker. I had it covered for part of that, and then I took the foil off for about the last half hour or so to kind of let the bark firm up a little bit. But don't pull the foil off immediately or else it can cool down too fast and actually toughen up a little on you. So anytime you wrap, your bark's gonna get, you know, a little bit taken off. We got a kind of a crack across the top of our pork butt here. But you know what? It's a pork butt and it's normal for a butt to have a crack. So if you get a crack like this, don't worry about it, okay? We're gonna take the bone out first. If you did a good job, it should slide right out like that pretty cleanly, okay? So we're gonna set that aside. You'll also notice that the pork butt is very, very tender at this point. It's, you know, all that fat and collagen and everything has really broken down. If you look over here, there's the pan that where we cooked it in. So there's still some juice at the bottom. Don't throw that away. I like to separate the fat out before I pour it in with the pulled pork. If you don't mind, you can just pour it right in with it. But if not, use a fat separator like this to kind of get some of the grease out before you add it to the meat. So coming back over to our pork here, you remember we have the money muscle down here. That's going to be the most tender part of the pork butt. So we're going to slowly take that off if we can. This thing's just falling apart. There we go. There's our money muscle. If you want to go kind of competition style, you can slice that if you want. But I just tend to pull it and kind of mix it in with everything, or just make my own special sandwich with it and leave the rest for everyone else. So we're going to kind of work our way into the pork here. You can see that if you've taken it up to temperature and given it time to rest, it should just come apart in your hands. The best way to do this is with the same gloves over the cloth liners that I've been using this whole time. And we're just going to kind of slowly take it apart little by little here. So once you've pulled it apart and added the juices back in and kind of mix it up thoroughly, I like to get the bark mixed in pretty evenly so that if somebody takes a little small scoop of pulled pork, they'll hopefully get some bark as well. So I'm going to give it a little try here. I've been dying to try this here, pulling it apart. I'm going to see if I can get a little piece with some bark. There we go. That bark has so much flavor from that gospel seasoning we used from Meat Church. I highly recommend trying that if you haven't used it yet. I'm going to try a piece without so much bark to kind of get a feel for how much salt we need. The amount of salt you add is completely up to you. You may be fine with it as is, just from the salt that was in the rub. But remember, it's a big piece of meat and we only salted the outside, obviously. So there is a lot of meat that hasn't really been exposed to the seasoning yet. So I'm going to add a little bit of salt. I'm also going to add a little bit of apple cider vinegar. What I don't like to do is just douse the whole pan of pulled pork in barbecue sauce. I like to leave the barbecue sauce separate, so when we're making sandwiches, you can add as much or as little sauce as you want. Sometimes I like to have a sandwich without any sauce at all. That said, I do like to add a little bit of apple cider vinegar just so we add some acidity. We've got a lot of fat, salt, and sugar going on, and if we add that acidity back in, it's going to help kind of balance things out. So let's add a little bit of salt first. Then we're going to add a little bit of the apple cider vinegar. All right, and then we'll try another piece here. That little bit of salt, a little bit of brightness really makes a big difference in the pulled pork at the end of the day, I think. My hands down favorite sauce for pulled pork is Blues Hog Tennessee Red. You've probably seen me use it in some other videos, but it's a vinegar-based sauce. It's thinner than a regular barbecue sauce, but it works great on pulled pork. Again, I don't like to just douse the whole pan in barbecue sauce, but I do like to put it on a sandwich when I'm making a sandwich here. So let's get a little bit of pulled pork on the sandwich. All right. Kind of just drizzle it over the top here. Just kind of let it work its way into the meat. Like I said, it's a thinner vinegar-based sauce. And there you have it. You can top it with coleslaw or pickles or whatever you like, or just have it as is. I like to have it even without sauce sometimes, like I said, and you can enjoy it. We hope you enjoyed this video. Make sure to hit the like and subscribe button if you want to get more content like this from our channel. You can check out the full step-by-step recipe for electric smoker pulled pork at madbackyard.com. I'll put a link to that, as well as links to all the products we used today, down in the description below. Thanks for watching.